It's been way too long since I've done a video about Bordeaux. So today, I'm going to be discussing the producers that were classified as third growths in the 1855 classification of Bordeaux. I'm extremely excited about this video because in addition to one of my all-time favorite producers, the third growth Bordeaux producers discussed in this video include some of the most compelling values in Bordeaux today. What is the 1855 classification of Bordeaux? Well, back in 1855, Napoleon III directed that the Bordeaux wines be classified in advance of an exposition to be held in Paris. This was so that the best Bordeaux wines could be featured at the exposition. The classification covered wines from both the Grave and the Medoc areas. Notably, however, there was only one wine from Grave, namely Chateau Haut-Brion, that was included in the 1855 classification of Bordeaux. The remaining 60 chateaux that received classified growth status were all from the Medoc. Why were no right bank wines included in the 1855 classification of Bordeaux? Well, at the time, either the producers that are on the right bank that are well known today did not exist, or the wines that they were producing at the time were very simple wines, and wines that were not on the radar of those that were performing the classification. Many of these right bank wines did not become household names until the 1980s, after Robert Parker touted the 1982 vintage. The criteria for inclusion in the classification of 1855 was based primarily on the transaction prices for the wines over an extended period of time, and to some extent they also considered reputation, especially for the wines that received first growth status. Of the 61 producers that were classified in the 1855 classification of Bordeaux, 14 of them received third growth status, and of those 14, 10 of them were from the Margaux appellation. For many years, Margaux-based Chateau Kirwan produced wines that were uninspiring and unworthy of its third growth status. In 1991, however, Kirwan hired a top consultant, and that consultant started getting things moving in the right direction. Today, Kirwan has about 40 hectares of vineyards in Margaux. 45% of these vineyards are planted to Cabernet Sauvignon, 30% are planted to Merlot, and 10% Petit Verdot. And they also planted a little bit of Carmenere back in 2017, and so that may find its way into the blend in future years. This Merlot and Petit Verdot percentage is quite high for a left bank Bordeaux producer. The Kirwan vines average about 30 years of age, but they have some that are as old as 60. Kirwan completed a renovation of its cellars in 2016, and they're now able to vinify on a parcel-by-parcel basis, which is all the rage in Bordeaux currently. Kirwan matures its wines for 18 to 20 months in 40% new French oak. They have a second wine that's called Les Charmes de Kirwan. Altogether, Kirwan produces about 16,000 cases of wine per vintage. Kirwan has been on a roll of late, and they've been producing consistently excellent wines since at least the 2014 vintage. Some of my other favorite vintages for Kirwan include 2000, 2005, and 2009 and 10. This is a wine that you can actually enjoy when it's young with some air, but it certainly will improve with a little bit more bottle age. I've seen this one selling for around $65 or so in the United States, so certainly a relative bargain as well. Another Margaux producer that received third growth status in the 1855 classification of Bordeaux is Chateau Giscours. Chateau Giscours was also producing relatively uninspiring wines until they underwent a substantial overhaul of their vineyards in the 1990s. At that time, they replanted more than 100,000 vines. Among other things, they increased the Cabernet Sauvignon percentage up to 65%, and they reduced the percentage of Merlot to about 30%, whereas before these changes, they had more than 50% Merlot, which is quite high for a left bank producer. They also began hand harvesting around this time as well. These improvements began paying dividends beginning around the 2000 vintage, and Giscours has been doing well ever since. I especially enjoy the 2009 and 2010 vintages, and the vintages beginning with 2015 through 2020, although 2017 is perhaps the weakest of that string. This is another producer that you can get for very reasonable prices. You can buy the futures in many instances for around $55 per bottle, and once the wine is released, you'll pay a little bit more, probably around $70 or $75 or so. Saint-Julien-based Chateau Lagrange is massive, even by Bordeaux standards. This third classified growth has an estate that spans a whopping 182 hectares, of which 118 is planted to vine. These vineyards are planted to 66% Cabernet Sauvignon, 27% Merlot, and around 7% Petit Verdot. The finished top wine, however, typically contains a much higher percentage of Cabernet than the plantings would indicate. In 2019, for example, 80% of the top wine was Cabernet Sauvignon, 18% was Merlot, and only 2% was Petit Verdot. Winemaker Matthew Bordes told me during an interview, however, that this 2% Petit Verdot was significant, and it definitely improves the wine, and that they can tell the difference if it's not included. Like many of the top Bordeaux producers, Lagrange uses parcel-by-parcel vinification, and it divides its 118 hectares of vineyards into around 100 different parcels. Lagrange uses an extremely strict selection process, and only about 1/3 of the fruit makes it into the top wine. This is also an extremely compelling value, and you can typically find this one for around $50 a bottle if you shop around. There's also a second wine, Les Fifs de Lagrange, which I enjoy very much, and which can be had for even less than the top wine. But due to the affordability of the top wine, I typically just buy the top wine. Due to the massive amount of vines that are planted, it's no surprise that Lagrange has a very large production volume each year. They produce around 60,000 cases of wine each vintage. This is a wine that generally improves and shows its best after at least 8 to 10 years of additional bottle age. My favorite strategy with Lagrange is to buy in strong vintages, so I'll typically skip it in off vintages, but it's definitely a strong performer in vintages like 2009 and 10, 2015, 2016, 2018, 2019, and 2020. Viewers of my channel are quite familiar with Chateau Cowanac Brown, which is a third growth Bordeaux producer from Margaux. This producer was featured in my Top 10 Bordeaux at $50 video. This is so because you can oftentimes get futures of Cowanac Brown for around $50 a bottle. Once it's released, it will cost a bit more, however, probably closer to $70 or so in the United States. An ownership change back in 2006 served as the catalyst to greatly increase the quality of Cowanac Brown wines. Around that time, there was a new winemaker who was hired, and that new winemaker implemented sustainable farming techniques and also arranged for the wines to be harvested and vinified on a parcel-by-parcel basis. In addition, this winemaker utilized a strict selection process, and only about half of the harvest is included in the top wine. Cowanac Brown produces about 11,000 cases of wine per year. This is definitely one that will improve with some bottle age, so I would probably try to give it at least 8 to 10 years, but provided that you have a little bit of patience, this is one of the single best values in Bordeaux today. Boyd-Cantenac is a third growth Bordeaux producer that's located in the Margaux appellation, very close to the aforementioned Chateau Kirwan. Boyd-Cantenac has 17 hectares of vineyards that are planted to 60% Cabernet Sauvignon, 25% Merlot, 8% Cabernet Franc, and 7% Petit Verdot. The average age of the vines is an impressive 40 years. Boyd-Cantenac produces around 5,000 cases of wine per vintage. You'll be pleased to know that this is a wine that you can actually enjoy young with a healthy decant, although it certainly will improve with some additional bottle age. This is a wine that I often find in the market for around $60 to $65 per bottle, so certainly a fair value for a classified growth. My favorite vintages for Boyd-Cantenac are 2009, 2010, 2015, and 2016. Yet another third growth Bordeaux producer from Margaux is Chateau Dizon. Dizon is a historic property, the land of which was used to produce wine way back in the 1100s. Dizon has around 52 hectares of vines, about 2/3 of which are planted to Cabernet Sauvignon, and 1/3 of which are planted to Merlot, but they do also have very small amounts of Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot, and even a little bit of Malbec. This is a producer that's been gradually improving since around the 2000 vintage, and is now one of the leading producers in the Margaux appellation. These improvements were accomplished through several primary methods, including increased sorting in the vineyard and at the reception table, a greater selection process when they're producing the top wine, and also increased use of new French oak for the maturation of the wines. they now use around 50% new French oak, which is a big increase from what they did previously. This is another wine that you can enjoy young, but it will be better with about 8 to 10 years of bottle age. 2015 and 2019 are my favorite vintages from this producer. This is a wine that you can typically find for around $60 per bottle, and so it's another excellent value and one that you'll definitely want to consider. Based in Saint-Julien, Langoa Barton is a third growth Bordeaux producer that is owned by the same family that enjoys ownership of second growth Bordeaux producer Léoville Barton. While it's under the same ownership and has the same winemaking team as Léoville Barton, the wines of Langoa Barton are quite different. This is so because the Langoa Barton vineyards are located in a cooler terroir than the Léoville Barton vineyards. As such, Langoa Barton wines are known for being particularly austere and tannic, especially in their youth. These wines need 12 to 15 years or so of age in the bottle before they start to show their best. Due to this age-worthiness, however, I like to take a flyer on some older vintage of this wine, as it's particularly long-lived and it has the structure and acid profile to age for a long period of time. This producer has been increasing the Merlot percentage, which is now up to around 34%, at least in the vineyard, and I think that this is at least in part an effort to try to make the wines a little bit more approachable, particularly in their youth. My favorite vintages of Langoa Barton are 2009, 2010, 2014 to 2016, and 2018 through 2020. This is an extremely reasonably priced wine and one that I can often find for less than $60 per bottle, typically around $58 or $59 or so. So certainly if you have some patience, this is definitely one that you want to give a try. And if you don't have patience, you'll probably want to shop for some in the secondary market to see if you can find some older vintages. The wines produced by Malescot Exupery underwent a stylistic change in around 2015. Since that time, they produced wines with incredible finesse and elegance, and they're wines that are well worth seeking out if you have not tried them yet. Malescot Exupery is a third growth Bordeaux producer that's located in the Margaux appellation. It has some famous neighbors as it's located very close to Rozon-Seigle, and some of its vines are also planted right next to vines from first growth Bordeaux producer Chateau Margaux. Michel Roland is the consulting winemaker for Malescot Exupery. This is a wine that benefits from 7 to 8 years in the bottle, so you'll definitely want to try to exercise a little bit of patience and not dig in too soon. This wine typically sells for around $70 a bottle or so. If you'd like to try an older vintage, I'm also quite fond of 2005 and 2009. If you're interested in wine recommendations, wine collecting strategies, and learning more about wine, please do subscribe to my channel. I've been collecting wine for more than 15 years and also have a level 4 diploma from the WSET. So I have both formal certification as well as substantial practical knowledge from the School of Hard Knocks. La Lagune is a third growth Bordeaux producer that has both biodynamic and organic certifications. This is a fairly large producer that makes 18 to 20,000 cases of wine each vintage and has around 85 hectares of vineyards. While La Lagune is located in the Haut-Médoc, it makes wines that are extremely aromatic and have elegance and finesse. As such, it is often very difficult to distinguish these La Lagune wines from Margaux-based wines in blind tastings. These are wines that I prefer to buy in strong vintages and to skip during off vintages, but they are wines that you can enjoy young as long as you give them some air, but they will improve with about 7 to 8 years in the bottle. Better still, you can buy them at extremely reasonable prices, often around $50 or so in the United States. Margaux-based Chateau Desmirail is definitely one of the most obscure third growth Bordeaux producers. It's currently owned by the Lurton family, however, and they have substantially improved the vineyards and the winemaking facilities, and these initiatives paid off beginning with the 2015 vintage. Desmirail can be enjoyed young, so this is definitely one to seek out if you don't have any patience. It will probably peak with about 10 to 20 years of bottle age on it. This is a very reasonably priced wine that sells for as little as $40 to $45 per bottle. The very best vintages they've ever produced are 2019 and 2020, so it's definitely one that's hitting its peak now. I would definitely keep an eye on this producer, as its reputation will only improve in the future, and the wines will probably start heading north in price at that point. Located in Saint-Estèphe, Third Growth Bordeaux producer Colonsegur has been firing on all cylinders lately. This historic producer traces its history way back to the 1100s. It underwent an ownership change around 2012, and as is customary, the new owners made substantial improvements to the wine cellars, the vineyards, and also the winemaking processes. Among other things, they greatly increased the Cabernet Sauvignon percentage that was planted in the vineyard, and they also started vinifying on a parcel-by-parcel basis. Colonsegur produces around 20,000 cases of wine per year. This is a wine that underwent a stylistic change around 2014, and since that time, the wines are a little bit more approachable and have a little bit more elegance and finesse, although they still are wines that are definitely very age-worthy and that will benefit from some additional time in the cellar after you purchase them. The futures for this wine cost around $120 or so a bottle, and once it's released, you'll definitely pay a little bit more than that. But again, this is just an outstanding producer and one that has been making exceptional wines, especially in the strong vintages such as 2015 and 16 and 2018, 19, and 20. One of the most obscure Third Growth Bordeaux producers is Chateau Ferriere from Margaux. Ferriere is obscure in part because for many years it was sold directly to French restaurants and it was not even available in the public market. In addition, the vineyard land for Ferriere had decreased to as little as 8 hectares at one point. Since that time, however, the vineyard land has tripled and now is around 24 hectares, and this wine is now also sold in the public market. Better still, this is an exceptional value at around $50 a bottle, at least beginning with the 2015 vintage. My favorite is the 2019 vintage, which is quite outstanding and well worth seeking out. This is a wine that you can enjoy in its youth with a little bit of air, but which will definitely improve with some additional bottle age. This is a producer that's very, very much under the radar and quite obscure at the moment. So you can definitely buy with confidence, especially the 2019 vintage. And in the future, I would expect that the reputation will catch up a little bit and that prices will head north. Margaux-based Chateau Marquis de Lim is another third growth producer that's flown very much under the radar. This is a smaller producer with an annual production of around 7,000 cases per year. Chateau Marquis de Lim has about 15 hectares of vineyards, and their vines average around 40 years of age. The fortunes for this producer improved dramatically beginning around 2010. At that point, they began a much more strict selection process, both in the vineyard and in the winery. The result has been that quality has improved quite dramatically. You can enjoy Marquis de Lim when it's young or at any time over the next 10 to 15 years. The best vintages are those beginning with 2015, but 2018 through 2020 are particularly strong. This is an elegant and fruit-forward wine that may appeal to many who like a more approachable style. This wine has been extremely impressive the past few vintages, and better still, it sells for an extremely friendly $45 a bottle. Next up is one of my all-time favorite producers, Chateau Palmer. While Chateau Palmer was a third growth in the 1855 classification of Bordeaux, it's widely considered to be a super second Bordeaux, and in fact its prices are not much lower than those of the first growths. Palmer wines are extraordinarily elegant. They have a silky, velvety mouthfeel, and they have incredible aromatics that include some violet and white floral notes that I very much appreciate. Palmer is located right next door to Chateau Margaux, but I've found that in some off vintages, Palmer can actually even make some wines that are better than those of Chateau Margaux, and at a lower price as well. For example, Palmer has made some exceptional wines in vintages like 2008 and 2012. And they also made wines that are candidates for wines of the vintage in vintages such as 1999 and 2004. Palmer has 66 hectares of vines that are planted to 47% Cabernet Sauvignon, 47% Merlot, and 6% Petit Verdot. They've ripped out the Cabernet Franc and no longer use that in the wines. The vines average 40 years of age, but they have some that are as old as 70 years. The Palmer vineyards are divided into 106 different parcels. These parcels have different soils, different clones, different grapes, and different rootstocks. The result is that the winemaking team has a wide variety of fruit sources from which they can use for blending. This is one reason why the wines achieve such complexity and why they're able to be so consistent year after year. Chateau Palmer also makes great use of technology. It was one of the first Bordeaux producers to utilize an optical sorting machine that helps to eliminate fruit that's not worthy of being included in the wine. They also use a special infrared camera to determine the optimal date for harvesting their grapes. People often wonder why Chateau Palmer was not rated higher in the original 1855 classification of Bordeaux, but one reason is that its very best vineyard today was not part of the property in 1855. Palmere began farming biodynamically back in 2014, and it received its biodynamic certification in 2017. Palmere also makes a second label that's called Alter Ego that is also an impressive wine. In fact, if the 1855 classification of Bordeaux were revisited today, even Alter Ego would probably receive fourth growth status. It's that good. The Alter Ego is made from fruit that's in a vineyard that Palmere acquired in 1998. Because this fruit is used for Alter Ego, and Alter Ego is not the result of declassified Palmere fruit, this is a second label and not a second wine. In any event, Alter Ego is also an extremely enjoyable wine and one that you can purchase for substantially less than the top wine. I enjoy Palmere wines so much it's hard to even know where to begin when talking about vintages. I mentioned some of my favorite so-called off vintages earlier in this episode, but some others that I really enjoy include the legendary 1983, and certainly if you're talking about more recent vintages, 2015, 2016, and 2018 are all 100-point wines and are incredibly impressive and some of the best wines that they've produced as well. If you'd like to learn more about the First Growth Bordeaux producers or the Super Second Bordeaux producers, please be sure to check the pinned comment below.